Something that Lasha just said reminded me of this story. During the Second World War, Anthony Eden was meeting with Stalin in the early 1940s, and Stalin said to Eden, he said, "Do you know what Hitler's problem is? Is that he doesn't know when to stop." And Eden said, "Well, who does?" And Stalin said, "I do." That's the problem with the neocons. They don't know when to stop, and they won't be stopped. Trump has 4 years left, and then there's going to be a Republican primary. It doesn't seem like Trump is going to, in any sense, crown his successor. And the neocons are going to be a force, again, to be reckoned with. The problem, though, that we face is that they're a force now to be reckoned with in both political parties. So it's an absolute nightmare because not only do they have a substantial base within the Republican Party, a lot of them have migrated since 2016 to the Democratic Party. And in some respects, the Democratic Party is even more neoconservative than the Republican Party. So they are going to remain as a force to be reckoned with.
Hello, everybody. This is Pascal from Neutrality Studies, and today I'm talking to two colleagues who've been on this channel before. I've got with me James Carden and Lasha Kasradze. James is the editor of the Realist review on Substack, and Lasha is the liaison officer for Sokumi State University, a Georgian university in the United States. Both of them are talking to us from the East Coast, and today, as we are nearing the 100th day of the Trump administration, we want to discuss his foreign policy. Uh, although I'm not entirely sure if policy is still the right expression for it, more the foreign 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 policy train or steamer, because so many things have been have changed. Maybe James, let's start with you. What's your general assessment of this Trump presidency?
Well, as with anything with Mr. Trump, there are positives and negatives. Right now, the country and the world seems to be focused on Trump's tariffs policy, which is reasonable enough. I think a story that's going underreported, however, is the divide within the Trump administration's national security team. And really, the team looks like it is about to unravel. Um, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, who really no one thought was qualified for the job, has proven everyone correct. He is not. And it looks like his days are probably numbered. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, likewise, is rumored to be close to finished. Um, so that's good news for people like us who care about peace and care about diplomacy and dialogue, things that have been, out of vogue in Washington for so many years. But the Trump team, still has this divide between the neoconservative traditionalists who, have brought so much damage to the world over the past, 20, 30 years, and the kind of America First uh, people like J.D. Vance and Tulsi Gabbard. And I think really the most interesting thing, and we can get into this, I'm sure, later, is the emergence of presidential advisor Steve Witkoff, who is really who's really become the Secretary of State in everything but in name. So, you know, it's very difficult. There's a lot of chaos here. But on the one hand, you have people like, Vance and Gabbard and Witkoff who are doing very well and doing good things, like talking to our adversaries, something that we haven't done in years. And then on the other hand, you have the neocon traditionalists who seem to be unraveling. So I, it's a mixed bag, as with anything, like I said, with Mr. Trump.
I see it like that too, especially like it shows the importance of the inner circle of decision making in the White House. But Lasha, um, how do you look at this factionalism inside the administration, and what do you think is the most important impact it had on what you're looking at?
Sure. I don't know if I can add much more to what just James has said, except to sort of go back slightly to the first few days, perhaps even like shortly before Trump actually entered the White House. We all talked and sort of collectively, overall analyzed what Trump's presidency in terms of foreign policy would look like, and there was this sort of division. Regional division, how they viewed it. Say, for example, Russia, Ukraine would sort of strategic view would, relatively speaking, reject the neocon influence, would have more flexibility to do that, and then say the Middle East. Towards Trump's policy towards Middle East would come more under the sway of the neocon sort of tradition. Um, I think basically that's what we are looking at, but I also think that even with the Russian Ukrainian conflict, Mr. Trump is coming under pressure of the neocon influence. Um, and so, but just to quickly mention what James said in terms of competency and sort of internal chaos. On the one hand, we kind of are accustomed to internal chaos with Trump. Whoever voted for Trump probably doesn't look at these details. His personality is such that, its overall vision with which he sort of challenged the establishment, which is fine, right? Shake things up. We all remember this sort of populist terminology. But then at the same time, we have to ask, this is America, and it has to be governed, and there are institutions, and still want to believe there was independent checks and balances. Right? Call me naive, but that's, and look, just like Mearsheimer says, I love the fact that, this is still a liberal democracy, and what are we doing about it? But, this whole cellophane brouhaha with allegedly some very important information being leaked to family members. And I mean, okay, so what shall I say? I mean, this is just, I don't know if this is extremely serious, not serious, but politically, this looks like a disaster. This is not some third world country where these things should supposed to happen. If any other administration, just to be fair, had done anything like this, they would have been accused of being traitors or whoever. But without going into nitty gritty things, it's just not looking good. I also remember Mr. Hexet declaring in Brussels, I think it was a few months back, it was a security a conference, saying that power matters. The era of power has arrived. If you remember that phrase, I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but he said that the balance of power, or something along the lines of power matters, not some ideals and utopian worldview. And some of us who actually adhere to a pragmatic, sort of realist-oriented foreign policy, we said, I know I did that. Look, great. There is somebody who says, it's ugly. It doesn't sound good. It's a departure from these liberal internationalist views. But yeah, power apparently does matter. And now we have this multipolar world where, the United States is being checked specifically by, projection of power by China, of course, and then distant third, Russia. And then from there, we've somehow arrived to where we are now, sort of feeling incompetent and chaotic and disarray, right? So that's just my view of this. Is this a collapse of some sort, or is this no? I think the Trump administration will sort of come out of this, but um, just like James said, I think there will be changes made.
This is a very good observation about power. We also had the statement, of course, of Secretary Rubio at the beginning of of his term that we are now living in a multipolar world and this is normal and we just need to find our place and we should also remember actually that Donald Trump started his administration on his inaugural speech saying like we will be remembered for the wars that we didn't get into. He's the peace candidate. He was also introducing himself still during the inauguration as the peace candidate. However, by now Donald Trump is bombing Yemen and has basically greenlit the resumption of what I still think will be remembered as the Gaza genocide. James, how do you square this? That on the one hand we do have all of these peace efforts with Ukraine, which I also applaud very much, and Witkoff is doing a fantastic job at trying to get the Trump administration into a place where either you get to a ceasefire or you get to, it seems that now the next thing will be that the US will just leave it and walk away, which is probably going to be also not a bad thing. But the Middle East, how do you square these two things? And also the rhetoric towards China. I mean, they are connected, I believe.
Well, I think with regard to Russia and Ukraine, you're probably right. I don't think that the idea that Trump and Witkoff were going to come in and dictate terms of, peace to Russia and Ukraine was ever realistic. I think it's a good thing that they're talking. In and of itself, that is a positive thing. As Steve Witkoff said in an interview with Tucker Carlson, um, you know, Biden and Putin didn't talk for 3.5 years. So the very fact that they're sitting down and that there are lines of communications that are open is a very good thing. I think that the war is in Ukraine is nowhere near finished. I think that the Russians are going to fight it out, and they're going to have to take by force the entirety of the oblasts that they've annexed formally. With regard to the Middle East, it's a total mess. You're exactly right. It's very hard to square Trump's peace rhetoric with his green lighting of the genocide in Gaza. And as you mentioned, the bombing of the Houthis. On the other hand, Steve Witkoff, again, is talking directly to the Iranians, which is a very positive thing. The thing that in the background of all this, and you're not supposed to say this in Washington, is the Israel lobby and the ties that Trump has to Netanyahu. And he's in a very difficult position because, his donor base, his ties to the lobby prevent him from doing, I think, certain things. But it hasn't prevented them so far uh, in talking, with the Iranians. So again, the theme of Donald Trump and foreign policy is always mixed bag. So, what they're doing in Gaza, what they're doing in Yemen is deplorable. Outreach to Iran, very positive. With regard to China, I think that remains to be seen. I think that right now, thanks to his tariff policies, relations between the United States and China are headed south.
Right. Um, there's these basically two schools of thoughts. One that says Trump is actually generally overhauling and changing the US foreign policy and domestic policy. And in order to do so, he has to dismantle a couple of the internal mechanisms, including USAID and so on. And this is a genuine change. And then there's the other school of thought that says, like, no, 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 this is continuation of policy, actually, continuation of agenda. It's just regroup, reload, and then shoot in a different theater. And basically, instead of shooting against Russia, you shoot against Iran, and finally you're going to shoot against China. And the Trump administration actually just wants to refocus U.S. hard power onto China. Lasha. Which one do you think, or what third option might help explain what's happening?
Well, I think it's going to be more of the same in terms of tension. I think, look, I think for the region, for the South Caucasus, we are in the proximity, right? Turkey, Iran. If there is a bombing campaign, And if, say, Trump succumbs to whatever forces there are in Washington nowadays, it's tough to pinpoint or call them, all these names, neoconservative forces. Uh, it will, from my perspective, as a Georgian looking at the region, Russia, yes, we know the relationship with Russia and Iran. It's not a sort of a classic sort of military alliance, but I have no doubt that Russia will, in the background, from behind the scenes, will aid Iran if such a campaign took place. It will also be a disaster in terms of geoeconomic, regional geopolitics, sort of this Turkic world coming out of, Azerbaijan, the Zangezur corridor that crosses, that Iran is sort of clinging on to make sure that its strategic sort of advantage there is maintained. And then, that's all connected with Turkey. That is viewed as throughout the South Caucasus as a sort of a Turkic world, as sort of almost anti-Iranian, and it depends how that invasion of Iran or bombing campaign of Iran it will disrupt, it will further sort of create a further chasm there with Iran and that whole Turkic strategic sort of geoeconomic and geopolitical setting. What was your next question? I think it was China you mentioned as well, or
Yeah, do you think it's
China will.
the US is genuinely changing its poli foreign policy, or is it just refocusing its hard power onto another theater?
It's not, well, its instinct is to be expansion is sort of be everywhere all at once, but I think it is compelled to change and to adjust based on sort of the rival power centers that have arisen, China, Russia. Regionally, I think towards Iran, not much has changed. Trump himself individually doesn't want to get involved in this. I don't think this is not a warmongering president that says, we should bomb everyone who disagrees with us. I think the only way that United States sort of changes its foreign policy, quote unquote, will be if it faces power projection from rival powers, if you will, Russia, China. But when we say changing, traditionally in terms of its sort of foreign policy culture, that instinct has not disappeared. I don't think, but I think it's that power and the sort of emergence of this multipolarity that has compelled it to maybe sort of review its traditional foreign policy. But that's.
Yeah, I think that there are two ways, perhaps,
Mhm.
to look at the new Trump paradigm. On the one hand, it's blatantly, obviously, shamelessly even transactional. That's what the tariff thing is about. It's about I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine. And you saw that very clearly, even in meetings with allies, even with meetings with people that he's sort of aligned with ideologically. When the Italian Prime Minister Meloni was at the White House this week, it was a focus on tariffs. It was a focus on trade. It was a focus on making a deal. That's one part of it. And then there's this sort of, and it's kind of odd given the America, the accusations that are often bandied about with regard to neo-isolationism. There's a kind of, I don't think that's the right way to look at it. I actually think that there's a neo kind of colonialism inherent in Trump's foreign policy. And you see this with Greenland. You see this in the discussions with the Panama Canal. They couch it in terms of, well, we have to do this, we have to take over the canal, we have to take over Greenland because of China, because of our adversaries. But there is something in the movement that sort of harkens back to America in 1898, to the presidency of McKinley, who he often speaks about. So there's this kind of transactionalism, and there's this sort of neocolonial um, aspect to it that I think has been underreported thus far.
Yeah, I think that's a very good observation. And maybe just I would like to add also that to use your metaphor, it's not you scratch my bag, I scratch yours. It's more like I whip your bag until it bleeds very badly, and then I offer you an ointment in return for you to to scratch my bag. Donald Trump keeps creating these pressure points, extreme pressure points, very hurtful that weren't there before, and then uses that as saying, if you don't want us to do this, then you have to give us something, right? We have to do a deal. It's the case with Greenland. It's the case with Panama Canal. It's the case with the tariffs, right? And in a sense, you're very right when if you're calling this like neocolonialism, but at the same time, this whole rhetoric of we have to make money or we have to save money doesn't square that much for me with the 800 US military bases around the world, which cost so much money. And Mr. Trump says we want money from we want money from the people we protect, right? We are like we protect we're like the mafia, right? We
Like
do
a
something
racket,
in your
right?
countries that you don't want, and you have to pay us for that. The other option would, of course, be to withdraw those. Why is he not openly thinking about withdrawing from NATO and withdrawing of the basis as a bargaining chip? Why does he do the opposite? Maybe Lasha and then James.
Um, can I just briefly follow up what James said? Sort of reminded me of something. So it's sort of a question. Kissinger's Diplomacy, I think it was. I think it's that book that he writes. He starts out with, or no, it might have been a World Order or Diplomacy. Just I don't remember exactly which one, but he mentions Teddy Roosevelt, and he mentions and he talks about, obviously through the realist lens, how yes, of course, it was under him that America sort of came into the world, but world affairs. But then there was choose and pick and strategic calculation in terms of building up the power, not just chasing demons everywhere, chasing ghosts, if you will, and being expansionist just for the sake of being expansionist. But there was a inherent sort of pragmatic view of how to make America powerful in the world, and I mean, and inherent in that view was this sort of pick and choose which geostrategic sort of option to pursue. Um, do you see that at all in the Trump administration, Pascal, James? I mean, do you see that? Do you think this? Because we are seeing something that is still different from the past 30 years, do we not? And
Yes.
can we resemble that to say this particular
I
example?
think,
Does
yeah,
it resemble?
I think that, I think what you were referring to is a justly famous speech given to the House of Commons by John Bright during the Crimea War, where he said that countries fall into the trap of chasing phantoms abroad while letting their own country rot at home. And I think that that is kind of big picture, um, is something that Trump is aware of, right? Since 9/11, the United States has been chasing visionary phantoms abroad while letting our country rot at home. Big part of that rotting has to do with these trade agreements that were entered into over the past uh, 25, 30 years. Now, Trump is taking it out on these countries that signed on to these agreements. What's unfair is that, these agreements were our idea in the first place. And, part of the trap that Trump has fallen into is of his own making. And what I mean by that is during his first term, um, he was very quick to come in and tear up agreements that were made between prior administrations and other countries. The biggest example of that, of course, is the JCPOA, the Iranian nuclear accord. But of course, they tore up a number of venerable arms control and nuclear agreements from the Cold War under the direction of National Security Advisor John Bolton. So we tore up the INF, we tore up Open Skies. So now he's back, and a lot of these countries are wondering what good is it really to enter into an agreement with the United States when a new administration can come in 3 to 4 years and say, no, we're not going to do that. So his big picture idea of an America first, an America that looks after itself, is a good one and kind of a new one in the history of recent American foreign policy. But it's going to be awfully hard to pull off when other countries can't trust the fact that they can enter into a lasting agreement with you. So that's part of the tangle that we're in.
Yeah, and doesn't it go even further? It's not just that you cannot trust that the United States will stick to an agreement more than the current administration. You cannot trust that the current president sticks to his own ideas. I mean, the tariff saga has flip-flopped on almost a daily basis, and it's also, the rhetoric and reality seem to be two different things. It looked as if though the tariffs were designed to be nationalist, protectionist. But by now, it really seems that they're more another form of sanctions against China and going to be a bargaining tool in order to whip other countries into secondary sanctions or secondary tariffs on China in order to disentangle. And those are two completely, utterly different purposes in order to use this tool of tariffs, which, in all fairness, of course, has its place in foreign policy making. But Lasha, this issue then of trust. How do you think this will impact, especially, let's say, smaller states like Georgia that are, and you said so again, said so before, have been trying to please the United States very, very, very much, but only so much. So how is this new reality now impacting their calculations?
Well, this hopes are all hanging by thread. I mean, the idea was that philosophically Trump is supposed to be, friendlier to, to sort of, to the idea that this liberal internationalism has to stop, and therefore that will have a positive effect on small states like Georgia, right? So, but. We're basically Georgia is hoping that the usurpation of the Trump administration by the neoconservative regime, if you will, does not happen. I mean, there will be, of course, influence. I'm surprised, actually, with all the respect to Marco Rubio, he's so far, following sort of the Trump vision, if you will. But we all know that Marco Rubio is not exactly, a far-sighted sort of, realpolitik practitioner. He hasn't. From my watching him, no patience. He has had no patience for any regime or government that might be sort of trying to survive of its own or find a balance between great powers. If Washington sort of consensus did not agree with it, Marco Rubio would be the first one to say so. And so, you wonder. If Trump only has 4 years left, is Mr. Vance going to save the day afterwards? We don't know. Who is coming in. And so the idea that somehow Mr. Trump can sort of create perpetual peace, if you will, in Washington, or tame Washington, and that will last for a long time, it's impossible to predict. I'm sure independently of what they do in Washington, by that time, I think China, Russia will have probably been even more powerful, right? They will have probably become even more assertive, if you will, respectively. What will happen to Ukraine? Is Russia going to continue and go all the way into Kiev? So um, or is Russia going to be satisfied? I think we've discussed that in the past before. When does Russia know when to stop that? Because that's also a very strategically important sort of mechanism to have to know when to stop, when not to stop, when to continue, and then we not yes, Russia is running this and perhaps has won this thing, but but by the time Trump is done. I think what will check the neoliberal, neoconservative establishment in Washington will be the international system itself. I don't think, in terms of the international system itself, there is going back to the days as usual. That unipolarity, I think it's over. Will there be for example, let's just say Democrats came into power, and sort of this traditional foreign policy elite sort of regained their power, in relative terms. Yeah, they will probably resist what's happening today even more. But I don't think the structure of the international system itself will succumb to that. I think that will save the day, in my opinion.
But the neocons are notorious for overestimating US hard power. They're notorious for starting wars that are from the outset unwinnable and end up unwon. The US replaced the Taliban regime after 20 years of war with the Taliban regime, but they never frame it as such. They never see it as such. They don't admit that this was a failure. James, do you think that the neocons can be finally like ousted from power and made irrelevant, or are they just, even if they are now being ostracized from the current administration, they just go and lay in waiting in all of these think tanks where they are now parked, right, just waiting for the next administration to leech on?
Something that Lasha just said reminded me of this story. During the Second World War, Anthony Eden was meeting with Stalin in the early 1940s, and Stalin said to Eden, he said, "Do you know what Hitler's problem is? Is that he doesn't know when to stop." And Eden said, "Well, who does?" And Stalin said, "I do." And I think that that's the problem with the neocons. They don't know when to stop, and they won't be stopped. And no, there is the Trump has 4 years left, and then there's going to be a Republican primary. It doesn't seem like Trump is going to, in any sense, crown his successor. And the neocons are going to be a force again to be reckoned with. The problem, though, that we face is that they're a force now to be reckoned with in both political parties. So it's an absolute nightmare because not only do they have a substantial base within the Republican Party, a lot of them have migrated since 2016 to the Democratic Party. And in some respects, the Democratic Party is even more neoconservative than the Republican Party. So they are going to remain as a force to be reckoned with, unfortunately, in Washington and unfortunately for the world.
That's why some people call it the uni party when it comes to foreign policy, right? You've got the
Absolutely.
same ideas in both bodies, so whoever you select, you're gonna have the different tastes of the same very unappetizing dish in front of you. Um, it's and how the question though is, did the MAGA movement that Donald Trump is created and is nurturing and so on, will that maybe also spread to the other party, and you will have like two kind of like counterweights who want to do different policy, or is it wishful thinking?
Yes, I think so. I think absolutely. One of the things that I think people need to understand about the history of the Democratic Party and its foreign policy is that when push comes to shove, the Hawks always win. There was only a very brief period when the Doves were on the rise, and that was during a 13-month period during the Kennedy presidency, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, until the assassination. And perhaps it was Kennedy's dovish instincts that led to that event in November of 63. Other than that, The Democrats have been pretty horrible themselves on foreign policy. And so there's very little reason to suspect that they are going to put up someone who is even remote. I can't believe I'm saying this, but even remotely as dovish as Donald J. Trump. But that's the situation that we're in today.
This is Lasha. Isn't this the contradiction? I mean, Donald Trump has this horrible rhetoric, really bullying rhetoric, but the underlying fundament that he built is actually a peace agenda. And in his first administration, he didn't start a new war. Lasha, how can we make how do we square this circle?
That's his personality. This is, well, they're just aside, his personality aside, I mean, we basically know how he operates and how he thinks. This is not a vicious in terms of going out there, overthrowing regimes just because we want this sort of, ideology, to be spread all over the world and make sure that no hegemon rises. He looks at it from a transactional in a way that's also good for America in paradoxically speaking. Yes, it's very transactional, but he sees in his pragmatic transactional ways, he just logically cannot put, two and two together and say, why are we fighting with Russia? Why are we getting this sort of, this unnecessary headaches around the world when we can avoid it? But make no mistake, he will defend the national security interests of the United States, just like any president would and should. But I think he's more selective. He understands what is unnecessary and necessary, in my view. But just to uh, if I may, James, sort of push back on your point just slightly. So, do you think, of course, neocons and neolibs are not going to disappear? I mean, we know this. So, this is the culture of the American political system, for better or for worse. It's a fact. But don't you think that this again, the changing structure of the international relations will be a balance against their expansionist and adventurist instincts? Perhaps in terms of domestic politics, we're all screwed. But do you think, in terms of international relations, there will be China, Russia, and global South that
No,
will
if you
be.
look at it,
Oh,
yeah, Lasha, if you look at it from a logical standpoint, I
yeah.
would say yes, but we're not talking about people who are logical. What we're talking about is a bubble. Chas Freeman, who I know Pascal has on many times, describes, the Washington foreign policy establishment as basically autistic, is that it does not know how to communicate outside of its own bubble. So on the merits, uh, I think that you should be correct. But unfortunately, we're not dealing with a system that, bends to mere logic. It has a logic and an energy of its own. And unfortunately, um, it's going to take a really big event, perhaps a tragic one, for these people to, finally learn their lesson.
But there's more than the outside as a constraining factor. What seems to me is that still somehow working is the internal one. If you look at the Russia-Ukraine war, at the NATO's proxy war against Russia in Ukraine, the one voice of reason, although it never publicly spoke out, seems to have been the Pentagon. The Pentagon seems to have said several times no to these most escalatory of all steps. Even when state wanted to had the rhetoric of we'll give you whatever it takes and we'll defeat Russia. And this internal, I mean, the understanding of the Defense Department of the U.S. The constraints of the United States, also in terms of weapons production and so on and capabilities, might that one be a factor that will be even more important as the U.S. economic power also seems to be waning at the moment, James and Lasha?
Yeah, that's entirely possible. If the economy continues to tank, if we continue to send out as many missiles, and armaments as we have been doing to Ukraine, to Israel, um, that's entirely possible that there will be an internal economic cost constraint to our global overreach. And I hope sincerely that that is the case, but we'll see.
Lasha, what do you think is the impact of the just of the military power? Because you were correctly talking about power, but the relative power has shifted quite a bit. And the assessment, and the one thing that's good about military people is that they tend to be more realist and they try to assess their own powers. Not all of them, but many generals actually try to assess.
In terms of power, I do think that there will, I do think that sort of unipolar energy that the United States, Atlanticist energy that America has had since the collapse of the Soviet Union, for example, I think that will be checked by the very structure of the international relations, this whole multipolar world. To what extent? That's a good question. And then again, I'm with James on this whole illogical thing where there are people out there determined to cause havoc. I mean, they will escalate. They will make things worse for Russia, therefore for Ukraine. Perhaps they will escalate in Asia Pacific. They will say enough is enough. Finally, Trump is gone. Now we have the field. I mean, there are all kinds of fanatical ways to, it's easy to break things. It's hard to build things, right? As we all know. So yes, I'm with James when he says that the deeply etched sort of tradition of, I want to say expansionism, but expansionism towards what and to what is yet another question, right? I mean, what are these people expanding towards? What is it? Is sort of this fanatical perpetual urge to maintain the primacy, but to what end? At some point, reality must indicate that it's impossible to perpetually maintain the primacy, and it's always better to sort of share that power, right? But and especially when Russia, as we know, does not threaten the United States or NATO countries, and we all know that that's a myth. So get ready for that myth to come back again. Once Trump is gone, and that this alarmism will return. I'm sure, of course, and that in and of itself will cause some sort of a chain reaction that will be more negative than positive, obviously. But then by that time, because this is what we've studied. I mean, this is what I sort of have my faith in, in sort of the rational foreign policy where China will know what to do, Russia will know what to do, a much wealthier Russia, much more powerful Russia will know what to do and how to balance against sort of return of transatlanticism, if you will. So. I'm conflicted. I still have my hopes in sort of stability that the multipolar world will bring, and yet I know what James is talking about, and I understand completely, and to a large extent agree with him that these people just not going to just sit idle and accept the new reality that is this multipolar world.
James, do you want to react to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the key question before us is when will the reality break
Hmm.
through the ideology? And the ideology of the uniparty right now is pretty much unshaken. And the question is, when will the realities of the new multipolar world, which is surely here, break through this bubble, break through the bubble that Chas Freeman always talks about? And that's the question. Can Donald Trump, in the 4 years that he has left, move the United States from this bubble of unreality to face the world as it exists? That's the key question. That's probably the biggest question. And right now, uh, what is it, 2 months in, 3 months in, it's not looking so good. Yeah.
Lasha, you wanted to say something about that?
Just for a second, this whole notion that so the power politics is back, right? So it's this sort of great power-oriented international system has arrived. What what are your thoughts on the possibility that, you know what, there will be enough room where the three great powers will divide up the world, basically. Europe is becoming more and more irrelevant. We know this. Uh, so, maybe there will be a settlement where it would just be a division of resources within the three powers. And not just this unilateral sort of export of, sort of the American vision all over the world. Uh, I mean, it's kind of the same point that we've all been sort of making here. But when we talk about sort of neocons coming back and disrupting or going back to what they had before, is there a possibility that could settle for, the idea that um, United States too will get plenty from this multipolar world by just sharing it with the other two great powers? Um, because we're talking about division of Ukraine, we're talking about United States sort of achieving its geostrategic sort of comeback on the European continent. We see Germany is weak, we see France is weak. They can't do anything on their own. In a way, they're kind of depending on the United States even more now. I don't think that they will strategically and autonomously, develop their own foreign policy against Russia. I think that's just laughable, in my opinion. And I certainly don't think the United States will allow that to happen. So, do you think there will be a division of resources, both military resources, security resources, and economic resources among these three great powers? And
James?
will that be the ultimate check on this fanaticism in Washington, if you will?
Well, I don't think that such a division as you speak of, would be
Yeah.
opposed by the Trump MAGA America First forces. I
Hmm.
suspect very much that it would be opposed by the Europeans. And the Europeans right now seem absolutely intent on doing everything that they possibly can to subvert any kind of deal between the United States, Russia, and Ukraine. And I think that while they likely don't have the military resources to do much, the EU is rather wealthy. They have more people, they have a bigger GDP than the United States, and I think that they should not necessarily be underestimated. I do not think that they would go quietly along with a tripartite division of the world. But I don't think MAGA would have a problem with it.
And nor will the Africans, nor will the Southeast Asians, nor will the Japanese. I mean, they
Right.
all of these other powers are still gonna try to do their thing, and do what works for them. But the other thing that we also must not forget is that. For as much power that Donald Trump has amassed, and for as much as he can reign now by decree, the United States is not a unitary actor, and Donald Trump doesn't only depend on his inner circle. The United States is a hundred. What is it by now? 380 million. How how many are you?
Around
There goes
330.
there are
330,
three.
330 million, 30 million. And as long as let's say the revenue sharing of the three great powers, or how much ever it is, as long as that revenue only goes to 10 or so trillionaires, soon to be trillionaires in the United States, and to nobody else, you're going to have all the domestic brewing for more change. So even if that came along, it would not settle the matter, right? So the internal distribution of the United States of wealth is still quite bad. And do you see, maybe as a last question, James and then Lasha, do you see that one change? Is Donald Trump also trying to change the inner economic model of the United States? I don't think so.
That's a really good question. I think that the answer is possibly maybe because he knows who his base is. And he has been on the tariff bandwagon for the past 40 years. I mean, there's film footage or news footage of him talking about the necessity of tariffs going as far back as the 1980s. I think that there is a genuine concern among MAGA and Trump world types like Peter Navarro that, yeah, these free trade agreements did hollow out the American working and middle class. And China's ascension to the WTO and the granting of China permanent most favored nation trade status resulted in millions of jobs leaving the Middle West. I mean, that's a fact. And even the most ardent free trader could not argue against those statistics. The what, you know, now is he going about getting those jobs back? Is he doing that in the right way, in the most diplomatic way, in the smartest way? I don't know. But I will say this, unlike almost every one of his predecessors, he's actually trying. So credit there, even though it's creating quite a lot of havoc and chaos in the markets. And I did misspeak slightly earlier. We are a nation of 340 million people as of last year.
Lasha, your assessment of the internals.
Sure. So every time I hear reindustrialization or deindustrial, so deindustrialization, I connect with this, this hardcore sort of neoliberal economics that James sort of just alluded to. So NAFTA, global trade, no borders, only numbers matter, sort of market fundamentalism, basically. And yet, I'm not an economist, but you hear a big question. How is he going to reindustrialize? What is he doing to reindustrialize? Um, and what we are seeing is basically, in my view, a modified version of sort of a neoliberal economics, uh, hiding behind sort of this liberal, economic international nationalism for the little guy, for the economy to be adjusted for the little men. For the working man in America. To what extent that is true, I don't know. We're looking, we're looking at concentration of power and influence in the hands of sort of oligarchic youngsters nowadays, the elites. Are they replacing, are they replacing sort of, is it just a mere replacement of the same old sort of elite feeding, sort of making life easier and providing much more, again, more resources to the elites of the United States that they, that basically sort of use to their advantage during let's just say the 70s and 80s neoliberal sort of economic era. So I wonder to what extent this is truly anti-NAFTA and pro working man, because I don't see how. What are we going to reindustrialize? How are we going to bring back Nike factories? And what does it mean to reindustrialize nowadays in this high-tech world? So I'm afraid, this is not going to be, and yet we're seeing this sort of gutting out of the government institutions, right? Quite similar sort of economic hatred of the big government. Is it not this case? I mean, we're, Reagan era and Margaret Thatcher era where everything was supposed to be privatized. I've spoken to David Gibbs, who was on your show here, Pascal, and professors, and people who actually study this stuff are puzzled, in my opinion. So we might be seeing some, rhetoric that might, populist rhetoric that might be more conducive to a voter, an average voter. But to what extent, actual economic policies are going to back up that promise is the question I want to ask.
And I think we cannot answer all of this. It seems to me we are all stuck in reading this orange crystal ball. But it's a pleasure doing it with you, gentlemen, and getting your thoughts on it. James and Lasha, James, people, where should they go to find your writings, your Substack? Can you tell me again?
Yes, it's the Realist Review at Substack.
The Realist
And
Review.
Also at the American Committee for U.S.-Russia Accord.
I'll put the links into the description. And for you, Lasha, people find you.
Well, they can look up my articles on the national interest, and I think James. There was one big article that might come up on Acura, so I don't know. We'll talk to James about that. But I just finished
Okay.
an article.
Okay, I'll put
On.
all of that into description.
Mhm.
My colleagues, James Carden, Lasha Kasradze, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.